Oh, God.
Yeah, go ahead and just do the disaster update first, Derek.
So you're just doing a briefing, right, Derek?
Correct.
So do I still call the regular city council meeting to order?
Yes.
Yes.
And Mayor, with that, we are ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Teresa. Welcome, everyone. This is Mayor Harmon. I'd like to call this city council meeting to order and state that all council members are present via teleconferencing. This is sort of a two-part meeting. It's a continuation of last week's city council meeting, and it's also a disaster council meeting. We're going to start with the disaster council, and I'm going to hand it over to City Manager Johnson to give us a report.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I have a short presentation tonight. As we always do, just receive an update from the Emergency Services Director related to COVID-19. I first start off with the cases in our county. We stand at nearly 20,000 cases, nearly 3.5 million cases in California, about roughly 28 million cases in the United States, and over 100 million worldwide. The trend continues to go upwards. I would just share on the vaccinations, and that vaccinations throughout the world now exceed the number of worldwide confirmed cases. Here locally, we've got 42 cases. We have 617 active cases, which is a number we're always looking at, which really helps us to see about the potential for the spread throughout our county and our city. Most of the individuals in our county, over 18,600, have recovered from COVID-19. But we did top last week over 200 deaths. And as we all know, yesterday was a moment of reflection as across the United States, we tipped over 500,000 deaths. And you'll see throughout the city, as we've joined other counties in the state of California and the nation in lowering our flags to half mast. In terms of ICU bed availability in SLO County, we're at 50%. The total of ICU beds, that's the number of licensed beds, stands at 38. The number of total occupied ICU beds is 19, with 7 of those occupied by COVID. The residents with COVID-19 in the hospital, 21, and 8 in ICU. So they're a little sorry about the conflict on those numbers. And so, though right now we are in a good state with our hospitalizations. In terms of the state's reopening criteria, these numbers continue to improve. Our adjusted rate based upon testing is 9.4 cases per 100,000. The unadjusted is 18.7. You may recall that those numbers were about double or maybe 3 times as much just back in early January, late December. Our positivity rate is going down, which is fantastic. And our positivity rate for a Healthy Places Index has gone down as well. So if we continue in this direction, the soonest that we could see moving to the next tier, into the red tier, perhaps could be as soon as next Wednesday. You may have seen today, there was a information and communication going out from the county that was pushed out by the city as well, encouraging people for testing. Testing is good for a lot of reasons. It helps us understand the prevalence. It helps us understand the trends. And when we have high testing rates, it helps us demonstrate to the state of California that we have the systems in place to be able to monitor, and then we get credit for that as a region, and it helps us potentially advance sooner into our next tiers. In terms of vaccine dashboard, about 7.5 million administered in California, almost 10 million delivered, and then 10 million shipped. The CDC pharmacy continues to make a push with over 1 million delivered, and then 1.1 million shipped. Here locally, we've had 54,000 doses, administered in San Luis Obispo County, which is a significant increase. You may have read that the supply stream is starting to become more reliable. It was interrupted somewhat by the weather events and the climate change events that we had last week, trying to recover from that. And I'll show you in the next slide, we're seeing that, or in the next couple slides, that we're starting to see the doses here increase. Where are we in terms of vaccination distribution? Those persons are still eligible in phase 1A. I won't read all of that. We're in phase 1B. We're now vaccinating persons over 65. The vaccine sent to SLO County Public Health, and this is just to SLO County Public Health, is nearly 40,000 with over 36,000 doses administered. So out of those 36,000 doses, who got their first doses? 26,000 of the first doses, the second doses approaching 10,000. A lot of activity happening this week in terms of vaccination at the 3 P-pods with the public points of distribution. You can see how many doses in each of the pods, and that total, which is a significant uptick, is 10,700. Vaccination appointments are now open, as I stated earlier, for the 65 appointments. They're open at Thursday at 9 a.m. We're planning for 10,000 vaccinations next week as well. So there again, that supply stream is starting to materialize. You're seeing a lot of push. We're seeing a lot of interest. When the appointments are opening up, they're filling up in about 40 minutes. So with that, Madam Mayor and members of the Disaster Council, that completes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Derek. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the good news. And I just, I know that that our staff has been incremental in, or has been instrumental in being able to get the vaccination sites up and running. So I just wanted to express our appreciation for their great work and being able to transition everything back to the county. It's terrific news.
Thank you. The fire chief, Axon, and the rest of the team did an amazing job. In 10 days, helped do all the planning to set up the 3 P-pods throughout our region. And once they were up and running, we received resources from the state and from other agencies. And so we've now successfully handed off direct control and management and leadership back to Public Health Department. And so I'm very grateful for the chief, and thanks for the council's support in allowing our resources to be deployed in that manner.
All right, thank you. And now we will go into our continuation of our last week's city council meeting, and the business item before us is to continue from the February 16th, 2021 to receive and file the after action review of the June 1st, 2020 protest. Public comment for this item, as well as for items not on the agenda, was concluded prior to continuing this item, so we will not be taking public comment tonight. And so I would like to start by asking City Manager Johnson and Interim Chief Smith to provide some information related to this item.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I certainly wish I could be here in person. There are so many layers to this conversation, and I just want to remind the council that the central reason why we're here, and there is now, I would say, a long overdue national discussion occurring on systemic racism. That has been acknowledged and acted on by the council and the community. And I'll just remind the council that there was a formal city affirmation of the well-documented premise that systemic racism has manifested itself into a public health crisis. We did make a request that public officials who possess the authority to declare a public health emergencies and declare systemic racism and ongoing effects to be an emergency. Of course, the council knows that we quickly established a DEI task force, which we believe yielded thoughtful, important recommendations for our organizations. And then, of course, then on February 6th, and then at your last meeting, the council affirmed that diversity, equity, inclusion was a major city goal, and we're working on trying to put those recommendations into action. The reason we brought the after action report is because, as we've stated, and I think it was affirmed by Mr. Behrman, is that we are an organization that is committed to learning, and that includes learning from how we responded to the events from last summer. We've studied it, we've reported it out, and on how we can do things differently. And the purpose of my remarks this evening is to address why we had the hearing last Tuesday and really reiterate the critical importance of civil discourse, and most importantly, talk about the work that lies ahead to fulfill our commitment to a welcoming city for all. So just a reminder, so why do we do critical incident reports or after action reports? There again, what we want to know, what happened, why it happened, and what we can learn. I truly believe the department was reflective and remains open to objectively looking at the event. Certainly, there were varying perspectives that were provided, and to open up a constructive conversation, and that's what we're hoping to hear about those perspectives and how we can learn from the facts. I do believe that last week that there was opportunity that was missed, but I hope that tonight and in the future, we can move forward with greater understanding and dialogue. Unfortunately, the hearing last week turned into a forum to upbraid the department and the people who enforce the laws of the state in this city. And I'm sorry for the people who work in this organization that they had to go through that. The council may recall that back in 2018, the council adopted a resolution amending and committing to a pledge for civil discourse. And I'm just going to read from it because I think it's important. And that was really to help us make sure that we hear from all corners of our community. And it starts with the respect the right of all people to hold different opinions at our meetings, to avoid rhetoric intended to humiliate, malign, or question the motivation of those whose opinions are different from ours in all our meetings, to strive to understand differing perspectives in all our meetings, to choose our words carefully at all our meetings, to speak truthfully without accusation and avoid distortion in all our meetings, to speak out against violence, prejudice, and incivility in all forms, wherever and whenever they occur at our meetings. And these are the standards that we've set, that the council has set for ourselves, for staff, and the expectations for our community, understanding that everyone has rights and can use their free speech. Our commitment to civility recognizes that incivility or outright bullying chills free speech rather than promoting it. It creates an environment of intimidation from which mutual understanding or meaningful change are unlikely to emerge. So I want to talk, just move to some areas that I think, well, some areas that I think are asked, and just a reminder of the recommendation, because I know we want to hear from the council and make sure and inquire if there's any questions. The recommendation was to receive and file the recommendations on the after action report. I believe it was thoughtful, it was thorough, it was peer reviewed by a national expert. It's accurate, it's fact-based. We interviewed as many people as we could to obtain their perspectives, and those perspectives were provided to the council. I think it's important that the council tonight affirm a commitment to civil discourse. As stated in the council's pledge, I do not think it's helpful for rhetoric intended to humiliate and malign and question the motivation of the individuals. I do believe that our police department approached this with a very thoughtful approach based upon what they believe was their best professional judgment back on June 1st. And I think they were reflective, and I saw that both on June 1st and afterwards. I think we need to recognize that the support of the department and our officers is not in conflict with the need to fund other services or create the change where needed. And unfortunately, that is a dichotomy that's been created. And I think we need to address it and say, in fact, we can do both at the same time. I think we need to recognize that we need to, and we're looking at that, we need to fund different services. We are looking at developing our major city goal, our DEI major city goal, our homeless major city goal. We are a learning organization. This department is one of the first in our region that embraced principled policing, embraced the recommendations that came out from the Obama administration. And it's one of the first departments in our city to take on the efforts of diversity, equity, inclusion. And so my last ask for the council tonight is to reconfirm our constructive direction of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and just acknowledge that we have declared racism as a public health crisis, and that we move forward in earnest with the DEI task force recommendations through the development of a thoughtful and strategic major city goal. And with that, Madam Mayor, that concludes my comments.
Thank you so much, Derek. I have a lot more to say, but I just want to say to your part, just to be clear, that Derek Johnson, I think, is one of the best city managers probably in the United States. And so I was saddened to hear you called out specifically, Derek, last week, when I know that you have done so much for the city organization in general, but certainly on equity issues in particular. So thank you for your service to the city. Are we going to Captain Smith next then?
Madam Mayor, we're prepared to answer any questions. I know that there perhaps were going to be some questions that may come up in response to some of the comments, but we didn't want to provide those in advance. We wanted to take the council's lead. This is your time, but I wanted to provide some opening comments and then turn it over to you. And if there's any follow-up comments, or questions, we're certainly happy to field those. And then I would suggest any sort of council deliberations and action.
Okay, great. Then I'm going to start with some comments of my own and then open it up to my colleagues for questions. So what happened last week was hard and complicated, and ultimately we didn't get to where we ultimately really want to go. Villainizing each other is not how we are going to be most effectively reimagining public safety together or healing collective trauma. So there's no doubt that discord must have space, and that righteous rage can be a catalyst for positive change. And what happened last week was way outside the bounds of how we try and show up at a city council meeting to meaningfully create that change. And I wish that it had been different. And I'm sorry to all involved that we were not able to hold the line for civility and constructive solution-oriented communication. I am committed to the fight for justice, and I appreciate our police leadership and our officers being open to this conversation. Personal attacks are against everything that I believe in and everything that I've tried to build in my own activism and the civility policy that this council has adopted and will enforce. We are all interconnected. We are all human beings, and I hope that we can see each other that way. And I reject completely the binary idea that we are on different sides, and instead stand on the side of a love and justice that moves us all towards a better way. We all want to feel safe and heard, and that we belong. And we all have a stake in this conversation: activists, officers, city leadership and staff, and the community at large. And so last week we reviewed the after action report, and we heard from the testimonial portion facilitated by Carrie Messenger in public comment the magnitude of the pain and the deep hurt that resides in our community. And that can be uncomfortable and difficult for us to hear. And unfortunately, we remain in a reality where we do not equally come to these conversations with the same privileges and responsibilities. And therefore, engagement on these issues can and will look different for all of us. And I just want to acknowledge and hold space for where that pain is coming from. And for some, it is even hard to believe that this kind of pain exists in our community. And I very much appreciated former Police Chief Jim Gardner, who sent in his communications today to the council that these observations that were shared last week are the necessary emotional catharsis that this nation is going through as we mutually work to deal with systemic racism and our relationships with law enforcement. And as a council, we will continue this conversation this evening. We continue pushing forward in the long and hard pursuit of progress, building community trust and justice. And the difficulty of this conversation is a symptom of the systemic racism and inequities that plague our country and disproportionately impact our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And as such, our efforts to address and disrupt systemic racism as a city remain steadfast. As we increase our awareness of the bigger picture problems, it is also important to recognize the really positive things that our entire community and this city organization are doing and are embracing, and to not lose sight of our positive community values. And as your mayor, I'm committed to creating a city that is more diverse, more equitable, and more just. And I believe the same to be true of the council members and our staff, and that staff includes our police officers. We cannot do this in a vacuum of only opposition and conflict, but in a collective acknowledgement of shared love and care for this community. And it is my hope that we can continue this conversation this evening in a space of intentional introspection, authentic civil discourse, and with a collective goal of growth and progress. Because the cost of anything short of that is too high and jeopardizes our ability to truly hear each other and achieve our shared goals. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to my colleagues for any questions that you may have. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much, and I'll have some comments at the appropriate time, but I am hoping to get a little more information about the long distance acoustic device that was brought up. You know, I understand the need for amplification, and there was concerns about that particular device having a potential to be used as a weapon. And I'm hoping I can understand what that is a little bit more and what the options were.
Excuse me, absolutely, Councilmember Pease, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I think there was some misinformation that was presented last week during the council meeting, and we hold ourselves partly responsible due to the term we use. LRAD is a generic term, such as, you know, like asking for a Kleenex. You might want a tissue and you use a generic term like Kleenex, and everyone associates that with that. And military grade LRAD is a very large speaker that would be mounted on top of a vehicle and could cause some of the damage that was described last week. What we have purchased is not a military grade LRAD. It's just a louder speaker. I'm going to ask Captain Michael to pull up a picture so you guys can have a visual. It's small. It would not have any of the side effects that were mentioned during last week, but you can see it's about the size of a large megaphone. It's not going to cause a lot of ear damage at the distances we'd be using it, nor will it have any of the side effects that was mentioned during last weekend. At the top, you can see that's really the LRAD that individuals were discussing in last week's meeting. It's not what we have purchased. It's not what we own. And I just think there was a misunderstanding based on the terminology we used within our report. So I hope that answers your questions. If there are any further, I'd be happy to address, but I know that was one of the concerns that was brought up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very helpful. And so does this have a kind of a siren to have people move away type of function as a disbursement, or is it more really just about kind of the communication, verbal communication, or I guess an alert potential for other kinds of emergencies?
It does have a siren feature if we were trying to get people's attention or if we were moving forward. It does have that capability. It has the capability, you could see a small mic near the tie. That's what we'd speak on. And it also allows us to pre-record messages. So if we know we're going to do a dispersal order and we want to give it many times and make sure that it's consistent and the same message is getting out, we can actually pre-record messages and play those messages.
And sorry, last question on that, just making sure I'm exhausting the concern there. What are the other kinds of microphone amplification devices? Is this kind of the right fit, or were there other pieces that were evaluated or that other entities might use? in
You
this
know, what we
application?
have is we have megaphones. What we used during that was one on our vehicle that was a loudspeaker that was, individuals said they couldn't hear. As we did our research and we looked in, we felt based on what we wanted to spend and what was appropriate for our agency, this is what we purchased. There are a number of items out there. I'll be honest, we probably didn't research all of them, but we looked at what we felt would be the best fit for the needs within our department.
Right. Thank you so much, Chief.
If I could just add, Councilmember Pease, you're seeing that a lot of these are being used. We're still working with the county right now, and with the planned decommission of Diablo, the question about the notification system that we have today, which those costs would fall to the city of San Luis Obispo at some point if we want to maintain that system. So you're seeing lots of cities that are using these types of devices as a cost efficient alternative to a lot of those pole mounted devices, and they can be used for earthquakes or storms or fires. They have a lot of different potential uses.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Pease. That was a lot of my questions. So I appreciate that. Around the body cams, I know there were a lot of questions during the public comment, but if I remember correctly, this is something we had already planned on doing due to a couple other issues that have been brought forward around the cameras. So I want to make sure that you could maybe share a little bit more about the plans we had around the batteries that were not necessarily just because of June 1st.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Our cameras are on a life cycle. Like any technology, they wear out and they have an end of life, and then the company no longer, we lose our warranty and they're not replaceable. And within our job, they take a beating at times as they are used, day in and day out. So they do wear out. They were due for replacement. So prior to this event, we were already looking at a replacement and getting a cost estimate for that. As this was the first time we had purchased body cameras, we had, over time learned that we were having some battery issues. And prior to this event, we had decided we wanted to look in, was there a way we could have additional batteries available to our officers so they could change them out if their cameras were dying prior to the end of the shift or wearing out. So we did already have a plan to have additional batteries installed in the patrol vehicles. That way, if an officer was having a particular busy day and a high use from their camera, they would be able to swap out their batteries and have a fresh battery. So anything that happened later in their shift we would still be able to capture on cameras.
Great, thank you. That's what I remembered us talking about before, and just wanted to make sure that was clear today. And is this the time to say comments, Mayor, or just questions?
I'm not seeing anybody else's hand up for questions. So
okay. Great, I'll keep going then. Thanks.
Yeah, questions. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So similar to the mayor and city manager, first, I just want to say to all of the officers here today and those who are not here in this Zoom room, I personally am sorry for not stepping in when the civility had reached this point of beyond. I have to say that sometimes I am a little confused around this free speech moment and when we can step in. And so I just personally want to apologize for the behavior, and not that I personally said it, but I know that I could have stepped in sooner. So I apologize. And I just really want to thank you for your hard work. One of the things that I love about this community is we are trying to train our community to lock their doors, because that's really our largest safety issue. And that is obviously due to a lot of your hard work. So first, I just really wanted to say that. We're kind of in a lose-lose situation right now is where I feel, but I know that we have the potential to go forward and do this together successfully and grow stronger as a community. One of the things that I hope that as we continue to go through learning and training and working together is remembering to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And if you don't know what that feels like, to ask. One of the aspects of just even, listening and reading the report and listening to people and their comments and looking at the emails, there's just such miscommunication or lack of communication from our community to the city, from the officers and police department out to the protesters. And I know part of it is we'll improve with communication and the ability to get out there louder and through the rest of the protest crowd in the future if that was necessary. But I look at communication as a whole. We all have to be open to listening, and that is something that the protesters asked of us. But we also have to all take responsibility and listen when someone else is telling us something too. I give the example of just by the very fact of seeing a uniformed officer walking towards someone, sometimes that is scary enough. And I know that that the clothing worn for the riot wasn't riot gear, but I think sometimes we get into semantics, right? Well, was that pre-riot gear? It definitely wasn't what we see you walking down the street with. So trying to figure out how do we help our community understand what each step looks like, what escalation step looks like, I think is also really important as we continue down this road. Hopefully we don't have to go down this road, but I was here, as mentioned earlier, during Poly Royal, and that was a lot scarier than June 1st. Granted, I was also 17, so maybe that's the difference. But so I guess as we continue walking down is how do we build trust? How do we have transparency? How do we have accountability? And these are all questions that I'm not saying we have the answers to today, but I hope that the community is willing to be part of that discussion. I hope that city staff, police department as well are willing to listen to the community. I know one of the discussions we had at the DEI task force was how do we have more community input? And that means the historically marginalized communities be able to share with you what this feels like to them on a daily basis. And I know we have PACT, we have peace, and we need to expand that and get into that more. And at the same time, I feel like the protesters didn't quite understand the rumors that were going out in social media, what was being said. And I thought a lot back to the night of June 1st. And I remember when the city manager contacted me and said, this is what we're about to do. And it was very stressful. It was very concerning. And at the same time, I had trust that in that room, you did the best that you could with that moment. I wish tear gas had never been put out there, but I had trust that you did the best you could at that moment and with the information you had. So I just know that we have a really imperfect situation going on right now. And I hope that we continue as the community to move forward with civility, and not in the type that puts people aside and you have to follow every single exact rule, but in the kind that just has respect and dignity for each other so that we can actually have conversations at the table. And I think that also means having to understand what those rules of engagement are would also be helpful for the community. So I think as we continue with, like I said, peace, impact, and whatever else we do, that we really put together those kind of sharing, being on the same page from the beginning is, here's what the rules are of a protest. Here's what we're doing, and here's where it goes next if things continue. So I don't know that I have any answers to say necessarily, but I've been really struggling because I feel like we're at a space where it feels impossible. But I know that as our community, we move forward and we do it together. And I hope that I can be part of that. And I hope the community, if you're listening, is also willing to be part of that versus just the absolute extremes. So that's what I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Pease?
Thank you so much, and thank you to comments made already to our city manager and mayor for opening remarks. Thanks. I want to thank everybody, just all the folks who did stick through that long meeting to make their comments last week, and for your patience in needing to continue that conversation today. And it reminded me that emotion and all, how important it is for all of us to hear each other. For my own part, I'd like to apologize for how the comment part of the meeting took place. I think a lot has been said about civility, but I also just like to note that usually in a public meeting when we're in person, we're very intentional as a council that public comments are directed to us as a council. It's our public hearing, we're the ones making the policy, but somehow on Zoom that was, it wasn't clear, and our officers and other staff were very much on the receiving end of those comments, and that's not okay. And so I apologize that I didn't see that dynamic in the moment and intervene. I agree with remarks made already in terms of, as a nation, we are grappling with policing and public safety. We have, as a society, created massive inequities in wealth, gaping holes in public care, healthcare, and gross disparities in access to housing and education and good jobs. And we, the collective powers that be, keep asking police to pick up the pieces. And we must address the root causes of these issues. That was certainly brought up a lot by our speakers, and I absolutely agree. I think we all would on that. And in addition, like many American institutions, law enforcement and incarceration are deeply embedded with racist policies and norms, inherited, yes, but still impactful and still current. Communities of color and others often don't even call the police because in their experience, police can make situations worse. And so police represent collectively violence and fear and pain and trauma. So we do have work as a society and as a city to reevaluate and recalibrate policing. I think, do I support our police department and our police officers? Absolutely. And I recognize that policing the institution is at a critical inflection point, and I know we're already starting that conversation. Our community will work together over the next however long it takes. And I know, I'm confident our police department is an interested, supportive, and essential partner in this work. Appreciate that. Specific to June 1st, I understand the incremental steps that led up to each decision that day. Looking back, we can see that actions could have and should have been done differently, that no one wanted the outcome that we saw ending with the use of tear gas, and that we learned hard lessons and have grown from it. I believe that the recommendations, that the after action report and the recommendations are appropriate, and they fit within the confines of our current policies and procedures. That's the document that needed to happen, and I will certainly receive and file. And our speakers are correct that the report is entirely inadequate for the depth of the issue. For me, going to protests and listening and reading, and then listening to the impassioned testimony on Tuesday night, it is shifting my thinking, broadening my view. And that night was, it was very difficult. I really heard the pain and urgency of our speakers. I saw the hierarchy of power that they're experiencing. I heard their anger and frustration that our values as a government seem to be upside down. And I see that some people of color do not feel safe and valued. It's really, it's hard to know that about ourselves. And as one of your elected leaders, I take responsibility for that. I'm truly sorry for the pain that has been experienced and the loss of trust. We cannot be whole until we fix this. And I am, like all of us here, absolutely committed to that work. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease. Thank you very much. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you. And I do appreciate also the remarks made by you, Mayor, to begin, and our city manager, as well as our vice mayor and Councilmember Pease so far. I think we're all coming to this with just a little bit of a different slant, so that's good. A little diversity right now, a tiny bit. I, as the officers know, I reached out to them immediately after the meeting and the next day to make the same apologies I've heard from my fellow council members, and I appreciate that that you're doing that also tonight. I tried to speak up and stop things and take a break when things were getting pretty intense in terms of personal attacks. And unfortunately, as you know, I ran into some technical difficulties. I'm not sure, not sure my emotional state at that time would have been useful, but I tried. And I also am sorry that that we couldn't just figure out a way to make that a more useful conversation in terms of listening and in the way that some of the speaking was happening. So I'm glad we all share that. I just have a couple words. Some of it's pretty similar to what folks else are saying, but I'm going to be a little clear about a couple things, and I'm a little more focused on the after action report. And I do want to say that I don't think the after action report was inadequate in the sense of what it was supposed to address. It was certainly in terms of addressing the larger issues around policing and Black Lives Matter and diversity, equity, inclusion in the 400-year history we have of oppression and state brutality. No, it was yes, that was inadequate. But in terms of dealing with the actual incident, the specific focus purpose, I thought it was accurate and appropriate, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Anyway, just a few words. I really want to make sure that people, and I don't know who's listening out there anymore, but I really want to make sure that people, that San Luis Obispo's people do not, I know that they do not want to live in a community that uses tear gas on its citizens and residents. And I'm sorry this happened, and I'm sorry that happened. I also know, second, that our police department does not want to use tear gas on anyone. And they are also sorry that this incident happened, as Interim Chief Smith stated at the outset of his presentation last week. I'm not sure many of our public speakers heard that, but I did. I also know that our police department is charged with maintaining public safety. That's kind of their job. It is their job. And so I appreciate the after action report for thoroughly gathering the information it did so that I could understand better how things got to where they ended up and how individual protesters experienced the day. And it helped me better comprehend related policy and budget issues that the council will take up going forward. And I think that's one of its primary intents also, and that did exist, as several have mentioned. I will say that this, it was obvious from the report that this particular protest march took on some very dangerous turns, and keeping people off the freeway ended up being the paramount goal. I agree with that priority, and I believe the police department's actions likely could have prevented serious injury or death on the freeway that day, that evening. But of course, we can't know what didn't happen. But seriously, as many of you know, that was one of the big concerns we've heard from that day until now, that people supported protests. They supported the marches, but they were very, very concerned about the dangers of going onto a California freeway with motorists who do not expect to see people there. I know some people are still going to disagree with me, maybe more than some, and that's fine. Obviously, all we can do is learn from this incident. We can't go back. We can't second guess it. So going forward, as others have said, I will continue to strongly support the anti-bias efforts the city is already making, and of course, the implementation of the diversity, equity, and inclusion major city goal that the council has just passed. I hope the community will also, as people have said, and I think this is, I'm glad we're saying this, and we should be saying it over and over again. I hope the community will very actively continue to participate in this work too. But I do want to be clear. The answer is not going to be to take away the needed resources or, quote, defund, unquote, the city department charged with protecting the public's safety. This is not going to happen. I know we can hear people talk about it and ask for it, but I just want to be real clear, because sometimes you just kind of need to say things out loud, and I'm saying that out loud. There are and always have been people who do bad things. Yes, right here in San Luis Obispo all the time, from car theft to assault, rape, battery, and worse. I feel silly having to say that, but obviously there is public safety to be protected, and we need to do that. What I want, and what any city and what any community wants, is a well-equipped, well-trained, well-educated, modern police department, proficient in best practices, not one gutted by ideological delusions and impulsive emotion. And I understand where those things come from, but that's not how we as a council are going to make these kinds of decisions. Not to say that we need to and will be rethinking a number of ways our police department operates, but just wanted to be clear there. To that point, as others have said, I will say that the abuse and invective spewed out by some of the speakers at last week's meeting was not only a gross violation of the city's own civility values, it was the opposite of helpful in that context. And in fact, it was harmful to me personally. I appreciate how others got more out of it. For me, it created a very I just got depressed because people were so mean, and we need people to be, as many of you have said already, we need people to be listening and be thoughtful and to express rage and pain, absolutely, but to do it from their heart, not in terms of abusing other people. It just, I understand how that happens, certainly after 20 years of public meetings, but that was really hard for me. Venting uninformed information and making personal attacks, as we've noted, stops real communication, and it tracks and bullies other people into silence and resentment. And that's why the civility guidelines were adopted by this council in the first place, and those guidelines must be followed, as you've said. I also am. I'm going to just say I know how hard it is to run a meeting in general. I run a lot of different meetings. I know how hard it is to do it when you're doing it in person. And I have sympathy, Mayor, for trying to figure out what was going on and where to step in and how to do that. So I'm not blaming anybody. I just wish we could have gotten a better handle on it, as we've all said. Meanwhile, I think the council and the community can hold both thoughts in mind, as we have said in our council meetings a number of times. We said it last June, and here we are saying it again in February, that racism and bias is real. It's every day. It's ever present for people of color. And the other thought, that our San Luis Obispo City police officers are not brutal or corrupt, but honest, professional, dedicated city employees doing their jobs in very difficult circumstances. So I will also be ready when the council is to support a motion to receive and accept the report.
Thank you, Councilmember Christensen, and I'm sorry that the technology was so
Just kept
difficult.
kept losing my sound. Nick and those guys were working on it. It just was one of those fateful things. The way it goes.
And I feel like, I know we've postponed our council retreat, but I do feel like maybe I'll just get a personal meeting with the city attorney and maybe Derek too about how to handle city. I mean, it is a totally different environment over Zoom. And I appreciated you, Councilmember Pease. I think that was you that said, I mean, in a city council meeting, I feel like I have been able to really hold what I would call a container around civility. And thank you for that reminder that normally in a normal city council meeting, I would constantly remind people to speak to the council, to speak to the council. And for whatever reason in the Zoom context, that just got completely lost. So I'll personally do some research myself, because I'm sure I'm not the only mayor in the country that is struggling with presiding over meetings in this context. And it is completely different. And so if it felt, and I know that it did, that there was an exception made and that there was potentially bias on my part, I would say that there might be some truth in that, and I want to own that. And also just want to name that it is incredibly difficult to preside over these meetings over Zoom, and it does feel on some level completely different. So I want to reflect on that learning from this whole process as well. So thank you for those of you that have brought up some of the specifics about that. Councilmember Marks, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'm really impressed with all of the comments of my colleagues that have been made so far. And I just want to start with the last comment that our mayor made. I want to say that the verbal abuse and the insults directed at council and city staff during that meeting on February 16th were completely unacceptable and must not be tolerated. So if people giving public comment wish to have their viewpoints respected, they must treat council and staff with respect, with decency, and yes, civility. And the failure to do that does chill free speech. It does create a bullying kind of atmosphere where people in the general public just don't come forward. So later I want to read some of their comments so that they at least had a voice to some extent. So I understand that the events of June 1st came from a moment of grief and outrage and the horrible things that have happened over the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police and so many other Black and brown people who've suffered at the hands of injustice. Now, I know that many of us, and possibly some of the protesters here, saw what happened in Los Angeles just a couple days before. People taking over the freeways, people smashing car windows, people cursing out the police. Okay, so to a certain extent, we're focused on our community. We're focused on our beloved community, but we are dealing with a national situation. And a sign of that, it's almost like an algorithm. It's almost like a computer program. It's strange that so many intelligent and well-meaning people are repeating exactly the same words over and over and over again, as if that is in some way going to be more persuasive or has the opposite effect. It alienates people. So although we can try to heal our community, if there are people out there, residents, community members, visitors, people from elsewhere, who have decided that we're kind of a soft target, that we're an easy community to intimidate and push around, and try to dominate. That's not going to happen. We need to stand up for ourselves, and we will. And I just want to say, in terms of running a meeting, when it's in person and we had the capacity to do this, we could just turn off the microphone of someone when they started getting completely out of line or cursing or, insulting people, going over the edge. I don't know if we have this capacity on Zoom, but you can mute people who cross the line. And I think it's something we should consider. So I also want to say that I am an advocate of and follower of peaceful nonviolence. I have been my entire adult life. And peaceful nonviolence is an essential part of democracy. It really moves us forward, and it appeals to the humanity and the sense of justice of everyone, okay? Including the people who might hold different views from us. But we don't define them as the enemy, because what we want to do is persuade and convince and appeal to their better angels, as Lincoln would say, to make sure that we all have and deserve equal treatment under the law. So I want to say I have participated in numerous civil rights marches over the years. I have been tear gassed. I have been faced with armed National Guards in civil rights demonstrations, and I have been arrested during protests. It doesn't wreck your life. It can be a badge of honor. Look at John Lewis. Look at Joan Baez. Look at all these. Look at Rosa Parks. Look at all these people who, yes, they have protested when laws have been unjust, and yes, they have been arrested because, as Martin Luther King said, an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. And that's what I would love to see from some of the people who have been protesting. And really take it to heart and not just repeat like a cookie cutter lines that are coming from other sources. So in that context, in my opinion, though there was a peaceful march on June 1st, and it was nonviolent. But when they started taking over the freeway, that's when the tenor changed. And they endangered their own lives, the protesters did. They endangered the police and potentially the people whose progress they impeded from driving on the freeway. So occupying the freeway has not in any way garnered the support of our community for the Black Lives Matter movement. In fact, it's moved people the other way. It's not just discomfort. It's people have experienced fear. People have experienced feeling that in some way they're being judged, even racially. So I want to just make sure that I do say that I believe that the after action report was professionally done. I respect the opinion of the former police chief, Jim Gardner, who he calls out some of the circumstances that he believes did make the use of tear gas something that was a crowd dispersal tool that could be used. So these are the factors: the length of time of the march, there were no identified leaders, there was information and chatter that people wanted to occupy the freeway again, and they did on July 21st, right? So it's not entirely unreasonable to think that might have happened. There were limited resources available to the police, to law enforcement, and it was getting dark, which can really change things. So the other thing that he points out is that during that time that the police were dealing with this protest, there were virtually no immediate police response for the entire city of San Luis Obispo. So if there were a robbery or someone was being attacked, domestic violence, or any other life-threatening act that would require police intervention and support, that wouldn't be available. So I think that's something also that we need to look at. And I also want to say that when you have a situation where you've got a giant crowd of angry people and very few police officers trying to deal with the situation, especially the one we're talking about right now, it doesn't matter what their political beliefs are. If they were white supremacists out there, Proud Boys and all the rest out there demonstrating and trying to dominate the city, trying to take over the freeway, would that change people's opinion about the use of tear gas as a tool of crowd dispersal? I remember when I was watching what happened when the Capitol was taken over on January 6th. I was watching that on television. I was going, why aren't the police using tear gas to disperse the crowd? Well, if they had been able to use tear gas, it turns out they were forbidden. I'm glad that there are hearings going on about this right now, because it blows my mind that they did not have crowd dispersal, non-lethal crowd dispersal tools at their ready. It could have prevented the death of all those 5 people. So I just want to agree with what Councilmember Christensen said, and that is that we do not need to reduce the resources for our police department. We do not need to defund them. We need the opposite. We need more resources to help with what Reverend Vines of the NAACP calls wraparound services. And I think the City Council is dedicated and having, moving forward to get those wraparound services. Diminishing the capacity of the police to protect our community, there's no upside to that, as far as I'm concerned. I feel that the AAR was a step in the right direction, and I really totally support the idea of moving forward with really thinking through policing, reimagining policing, and are evaluating our procedures and doing everything to minimize the possibility that tear gas would have to be used in the future. So I just want to conclude by saying that I think that during the campaign when I was running for office, I was talking about the possibility of forming some kind of police oversight or police accountability committee or commission. I know Councilmember Christensen would hate to have one more, but no police department is immune from public scrutiny, nor should it be. So we need to have, and part of what some of the people who were testifying on the 16th, some of the things that they were saying that I could kind of tease out from the anger and the mechanistic rhetoric was that we need more community input. And we do need more community input in terms of moving forward. And I think it can be done in a constructive way, in a way that is unique and tailored to our community. Not just being buffeted by a national movement that doesn't really care about our community. We need to step up. So I want to just agree with the points that the city manager made at the beginning of the meeting. The report was professionally done. I want to reaffirm civil discourse. I do support our police department, and I don't think there's any conflict at all with increasing mental health and social worker support so that the police can be free to do what they do best. And we can also have people working with the homeless population, the unhoused population, and other situations where non-uniformed trained people can actually maybe prevent the need for police intervention. And I also want to reaffirm DEI and moving forward with that. So I think those points were well taken. So I'll stop right there. I want to thank you and thank everyone for your heartfelt testimony and comments today. Thank you.
Captain Smith, I really appreciated our difficult but really important conversation that you and I had. And I just wanted to I want to invite you to, I didn't know if there was anything, that you wanted to share. I know it was of a more, I don't want to say personal, but I appreciated hearing from you as a human being and a person and your frustration with what happened and the fact that, our police department has actually done a lot on diversity issues and the frustration with sort of being called out in spite of that and all of that. And I just, if you don't feel like speaking to that, that's completely fine. But I just wanted to invite you to share or to speak to that on any level, if that's something that you feel would be helpful or that you'd like to do.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be honest, I didn't have a prepared statement, but I will, since there are no further questions, thank the council and city staff for the opportunity to present this report. It was an opportunity for us to look at an unfortunate incident, and like many of you said, learn and grow. I'll end on first off, apologizing to my officers. I think what happened last Tuesday was unfortunate. And as much as they are been professional over the years, have dedicated their services and their time away from family to this community, I was saddened by the comments and the personal attacks that occurred. And for that, I'm sorry. I want the public to know that they have a phenomenal police department who has made strides, and I would say is far ahead of many other agencies within California in many of the areas that were discussed today, and I'm very proud of them for that and their willingness to participate in the numerous hours of training, community outreach, and just being a part of the things that we've asked them to be a part of. And as far as the incident on June 1st, I would thank them for their professionalism. They're willing to provide safety to not only those who participated in the protest, but stood by during some very difficult and challenging situations. And at the conclusion of this protest, when tear gas was used, I want to be firm that this was no longer a peaceful protest, but a protest that had turned into attacking police officers. And it was my duty as the commander out in the field at that time to ensure that not only our public was safe, but my officers were safe. And I stand by the decision that was made that day, as unfortunate as it was, and am happy that there was no serious injuries, and we were able to effectively end what had turned into a very bad situation. So I will conclude with that. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to present this report.
Thank you, Captain Smith. Vice Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I just wanted to say something in regard to Carlin Christensen and your responses. Sorry, Councilmember Christensen, your responses. And Councilmember Marks, I appreciate the mechanic aspect of defund the police as a national message and the extreme that it's saying. But I guess I just want to remind that with the actual purpose of defund the police, it was really in the sense of have the police do what they do and what their purpose is, and let's have social services, fund, education, mental health, youth services be taken care of, and those wraparound services are not at the job of the police. So I guess I just want to make sure that we talk about this in a logical way, that what the kernel, the purpose is of that defund the police message. So I agree, we're not wiping out the police, we're not getting rid of all the budget. But I do think that we have to remember we're talking about, and we've already done by having the homelessness response manager as an example of something that we're going to try to help the homeless and not have the police do that job. That shouldn't have to land on them. So I think there's just reminding people that that is still a message that I think is important. And while we do have good police officers, sometimes someone does an error, and that's where I think that oversight committee could be helpful. Whether it's our city police or the Cal Poly police, we've had stories of actions that have happened here, not just nationally. Thankfully, nothing like George Floyd's murderer, of course. But I do want to remember that we're continuing to grow as a community and understand each other as different community members. And I don't want to take that away from people of color who have experienced negative experiences. So I have to say that.
Thank you. Councilmember Christensen.
I appreciate you articulating that, Vice Mayor Stewart, and I want to assure you that I understand the difference between, quote, defunding the police and what I think we're all in agreement, taking a closer look at trying to get our police doing the policing and getting the county and others to do the social services. I'll say that oftentimes, especially in areas such as domestic violence and mental health and drugs and substance abuse, they do cross over quite a bit. But I was really speaking specifically to the people who have written us and who have said, defund the police. Take all of their money and put it someplace else. And that's more what I was responding to, is that specific audience. And I just wanted to be really clear about that. But I appreciate your reminding me that reminding the listeners that there is a lot more nuance that I think we're all in agreement on. And I have to tell you, I mean, I've been working on issues of sexism and bias for my entire life since I was a teenager, and I have seen, as you say, I have seen examples of that locally among community members, among business people, among police officers. Some of it a little more overt and some of it unconscious. So including friends too. So I am totally not blind to the fact that we are human beings and that there are different levels of education that need to happen, different levels of training. But I, wanted to make sure that people understood that I believe that this council and the city is blessed to have a police department, which for the most part is professional, honest, dedicated, and highly open to the kind of education, training, and conversations that we're talking about. So I think we're on the same page, and I think that articulating those things is really great. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Stewart, I see your hand is still up. You want to speak? No? Okay.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have a question or have anything to add? If not, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move that we accept the after action report. Receive and file.
I'll second it.
Thank you. City Clerk?
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stewart,
Yes.
Mayor Harmon.
Yes, and with that, it passes 5-0. Thank you, everyone. I know we have a few more, a little bit here left to go, but I just want to thank everyone. I am trusting that this difficult process will bear some good fruit moving forward. Derek, I know that you had some things that you wanted to discuss briefly about extending our meetings or starting our meetings earlier. So would you like to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So I wanted to alert the council. I think I've talked to many of you individually. Our calendar, our forecast is currently full through the remainder of the fiscal year. So that takes us through July 1st of 2021. And we have tried to push down our normal meeting times that we try to shoot for is roughly about 4 hours per meeting when we're meeting in person. I think as we've learned through the pandemic that probably the capacity for those to have the kind of attention and focus and actually just take care of each other is probably, greater than 3 hours is probably too much. So we've tried to push towards a total of 3 hour meeting times. That means that we're likely going to need some possible early start times. So we have some options for you. On March 16th, we would propose that we start early on March the 16th at 5 o'clock and then take a break for perhaps a half hour or more. And so that the council has a time to get away from the screen and be able to rejuvenate in whatever way you need to before we move through the agenda. We'd also probably suggest the same thing for April 6th. And we've got a long meeting that night. I will share with you, if you recall, I've shared on many occasions that we had planned to bring forward the police station program review. I have had a lot of discussions, just had one yesterday with our designers and others, and am feeling as I've the program, just so you're aware, the program for that document, for that station was developed back in 2018. So much has changed since 2018 that we're trying to take a real fresh look at it. So I do not think we're going to be ready for April 6th. I wanted to alert you that, but we're still working on what we think is the right approach to review the program with the city council. So we've got those two items. We'll poll you to start early, both on March 16th and April 6th. We also have some unscheduled items. We have the advisory body recognition. We did not hold that last year, largely because it was right at the outset of the pandemic, and we were all just getting handy with virtual meetings. And we feel like we do need to honor all of the 100+ volunteers that support our city and all of the strong advisory body work that they do. And so we'll be working with you to schedule that. We also have an item which I think will invite a lot of public comment, which is around banned and restrictions of use of shopping carts and use of playgrounds and any sort of clarification around structures in city parks. So we'll be polling you on that. And then lastly, it is time again for your appointed officials evaluations. And so we'll be asking for you to set aside some time again. So that is all just to say that there will be a flurry of invitations going out to the city council. But if there's any thought tonight about, in general, what best approach works, we'd love to hear that. I will caution you that adding additional meetings, to the calendar, going to 3 or 4 meetings a month is a completely different workflow in terms of the process to introduce and process staff reports. And so, our preference would be to extend the meetings, but there again, we want to be sensitive, and obviously, we work for you and want to support your needs. And there again, if there's ways that we can be much more crisp in our presentations and get to the heart of the matter sooner, we're happy to cut the presentation short. We're just trying to strike that balance with this virtual meeting setting.
Vice Mayor Stewart.
I'm game for going like 5:30, but as a full-time worker person, this is very difficult to be here at 5. Today was extremely challenging. So I just, not just for me personally, but also for future people that may wish to be in this position, I really just encourage us to not go with the 5 o'clock time.
Councilmember Christensen.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm exactly the opposite. I have, when I first got onto the council, we had meetings that were almost every week when we ran into difficult times, and I found that weekly meetings were overwhelming, exhausting, and really awful. I really could not deal with it, and I was working full time. So I'm not sure, Vice Mayor Stewart, I totally hear what you're saying, but you may find that having an actual council meeting every week
That's not what I was saying.
Well, you were saying at 5:30, but what we used to, what I asked staff to do was to start at 4 or 4:30. And what you're saying is, you can't even start at 5. So it's a problem. It's a problem. And I don't know I don't know if we can kind of do something. Sometimes we'll start at 5:30 and 5, and sometimes we'll have an extra meeting. It's a conundrum. I'm just saying that if we get into a period where we're having meetings one after the other in a week, there's another kind of exhaustion that fits in. But I agree that having long Zoom meetings is very, very exhausting, so that you need to start early so you can take a decent break in the middle of them. But that's where I'm saying.
Thank you, Councilmember Keys.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be having the conversation. City Manager Johnson, can you clarify when you say, 5 o'clock with a break, are you trying to have still like 3 or 4 hours of time? Or if we started at 5:30, went until 6:30, had a 20-minute break, and then went on from there until 10, would that give us enough hours of actual meeting?
We think so. If you started another, hour earlier, we can certainly tighten up on the presentations. I think some of the presentations have been very thorough, and there's opportunity for us to be more succinct. So I do think with an earlier start time, with a healthy break, and us that we can move through your agendas.
Great, thank you. And then there has been seems to be some confusion and interest in about homelessness in general under the current policies and practices. And I understand the homelessness response manager position is in the works and you had mentioned about bringing forth shopping carts, et cetera. Is it worth kind of holding off and giving an update all as an agendized item, or would it be worth sometimes like how you in your just regular city manager update kind of tick off a few misunderstandings and programs and that type of thing around homelessness?
Yeah, I think I'm prepared, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Pease, to update the council at each of the meetings on, I think, a topic that is, I would say, very top of mind of the council and the community. And there are activities that underway, and both positive and ones that where we're taking enforcement action that I want to make sure that the community has the appropriate information. I think we can do that while also concurrently bringing forward to you some of these policy items for council consideration.
Okay, so update at some point is just part of city manager, and then we'll look at the specific policy items. Thank you.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think starting at 5:30 would work and I certainly understand the situation of needing to leave work and get home and get ready for a council meeting. But I would like to say that occasionally having another city council meeting on the second Tuesday not the fourth Tuesday. Fourth Tuesday is very difficult for me. But especially if it were something like a study session, if we were going to be studying something like the possibility of having a police oversight committee, for instance, or commission where it's actually looking at alternatives and not making a decision as much as trying to learn. There are these kind of educational aspects where we could have a shorter city council meeting on the second Tuesday. I would be in favor of that. So not something that I'm not proposing anything that would disrupt the workflow. And I do understand we got a week to prepare, and then I understand the way it works. But there are times that there are projects that people are working on that are bigger and that take place over time. And so that where maybe a 2-hour city council meeting would be possible. And I just have to say, as the dean of the local law school, we've reduced our classes to 2 hours because there are studies that show that after 2 hours of straight Zoom, people start spacing out, and it's really hard for them to learn, and it's hard for them to sometimes even stay awake, and their eyes hurt and all of that. So I think we do need, it is a work condition, not just for the council, but certainly for staff and also for the public trying to follow what we're doing. That I appreciate you bringing this up. Thank you.
I am a Council Vice Mayor Stewart.
I just want to make sure that, the 5:30 works for me. We've been doing these 5-minute breaks, which wasn't quite enough. So I can see the 15-minute break. But we do have closed sessions as well. So there are other things that we leave and have a 5 p.m. meeting. So I was just saying that it starts to add up after a while. So 5:30 is absolutely fine if that's where we're going to compromise to.
Derek, does that give you enough information? I don't have a dog in this fight so much. I want to do what's best for the rest of the council and the staff. I appreciated Vice Mayor Stewart's comments about, working people both on council and future councils, but also people that might want to participate in, watching or participating in our meetings as well. But if 5:30 feels good for people, does that solve the problem, Derek, or is that not quite enough?
Madam Mayor and members of the council, I think that will help us. I think we need to do some management. I think we are likely going to need one special meeting in there. I don't think we can accommodate it all with just the early start time. So we'll work, and it's helpful to understand that the second Tuesday is a preference. And so we'll look to see how we can coordinate and curate the forecast in a way that makes sense. As Councilmember Marks remarked, that we do have a tradition of study sessions being separate unto themselves for special meetings, because the community sometimes is surprised when there's a significant issue that's not on the normal meeting calendar that's set up for action. And so, not wanting to surprise the community, we'll look to see how we can adjust our forecast and perhaps have a special meeting on a study session rather than on a significant public policy issue.
Okay, so yes, Derek, you have enough information to cobble together next steps. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, great. All right. Was there anything else that needed to be brought up this evening?
Madam Mayor, just to invite you, I think there was council communications. I don't know if any of you wanted to share any thoughts following the last meeting, but just that was the only other item that you did not finish the course of business last time.
I'm not seeing any hands. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for showing up in every way. Yeah. It's a lot to process this week. So thank you. And thank you for my colleagues on council, the staff in the police department, and also the community that even though it's bumpy and difficult and painful at times, I think we all agree that we're all here for the same purpose, which is to make this a better place. And that's what I'm all about. And I know my colleagues are all. I appreciate the process, even though it's hard at times. And with that, we will adjourn, and our next regular city council meeting will be on March 2nd, virtually here at 6 p.m. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good night.
everyone. Good night.
Thank you.